The sun burned hot above the desert sky. Red winds blew across the sand, dry and sharp, cutting like tiny blades. Every step felt heavier than the last. The alien widow, Laura, dragged her feet forward, her arms wrapped around her baby, who was silent now, crying, not moving. Only his chest rose and fell slowly. Her skin, once glowing with her species' natural color, had faded to a pale gray. Her lips were cracked and her stomach had stopped growling long ago. There was no more hunger, only numbness. Her people had cast her out 3 days ago after her mate was killed in the raid. In her culture, widows were seen as cursed. Her village leader told her she had 3 days to leave or be burned with her dead husband's ashes. She had no strength left to argue. No food, no water, no friends, only her child. She held him tighter, kissed his cold forehead, and kept walking. The dunes stretched forever. The sky seemed bigger than ever before. The wind howled like ghosts. Her legs shook, her knees dropped. But she pushed back up. Her child needed her, but finally, her body gave up. She fell forward onto her knees, then collapsed onto the hot sand. She wrapped her arms around her baby, shielding him from the sun. Her eyes closed, and she whispered, "I'm sorry." Footsteps crunched nearby. She didn't hear them at first. Then, a shadow fell over her. She opened one eye, thinking maybe it was death come for her. But it wasn't. It was a man. A human man. He stood tall, covered in a brown dust coat and goggles, holding a travel stick in one hand. His face was sunburnt, but his eyes were calm. His name was Caleb, a scavenger who explored old war zones for tech pieces to trade. He had wandered farther than usual today. At first he thought she was dead. Then he saw the baby shift in her arms. He dropped to one knee. "Hey," he said softly, unsure if she understood. "You're alive." Laura growled weakly, trying to pull her baby closer, her fingers stiff like stone. She didn't trust human stories, said they took alien women and sold them off planet. But Caleb didn't move to touch her. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a silver packet. He opened it and gently set a small piece of food near her lips. It smelled warm, rich, meaty. She stared at him, her body frozen. He smiled slightly. "Eat it. You need it more than I do." Laura didn't move. She watched his eyes, trying to find the lie, but there was no cruelty there, just worry. Her hands shook as she slowly reached forward and took the food. She sniffed it, then took a bite. It felt like fire in her cold body. Life rushed back into her limbs. The baby made a soft sound. Caleb smiled wider. "There you go, little guy. You're tough." He reached for a canteen and placed it on the sand in front of her. She hesitated again, but thirst beat fear. She drank, her whole body trembling. "Better?" Caleb asked, sitting down on a nearby rock. She nodded slowly. "Why?" she whispered in her own language. He didn't understand the word, but he saw her face, confused, tired, broken. He spoke gently. "You don't need to thank me. I'm not like the others." Laura didn't reply. She kept looking at him. Her heart beat faster, unsure if this was a trick, but something inside her, something deep, felt a little safer than before. Caleb looked at the baby. "Is he yours?" Laura nodded. "My son," she whispered. Caleb leaned back and sighed. He looked out at the horizon. "This planet's cruel. Been walking it for 3 years now. Haven't seen a good day in a while." Laura blinked at him. She didn't understand all his words, but she caught the tone. Lonely. She pulled her child closer and stared at the man again. What did he want? Why wasn't he taking her things or calling his people? Then Caleb did something strange. He pulled out another food packet, but instead of eating it himself, he placed it beside her again. "That's my last one," he said with a shrug. "But you need it more." Laura felt her throat tighten. Her people had given her nothing. This stranger had given her everything he had left. She looked at her baby's face. His little fingers moved, searching for warmth, and for the first time in 3 days, she let herself hope again. The sun had dipped low by the time Caleb finished building a small shelter using scrap metal, cloth panels, and old drone wings he had salvaged. It wasn't much, but it gave shade. The air had cooled slightly, but the wind picked up, carrying sand across the plain like a river of fire dust. Laura sat curled with her baby under the thin shade. She hadn't spoken again, but her eyes never left Caleb. She didn't know what he wanted. He gave her food and water, then stayed close, yet didn't touch her or threaten her. In her culture, kindness like this didn't exist between species. Her instincts told her to run, but her legs still wouldn't carry her far. Caleb dropped a heat stone near her feet. "This'll warm up soon," he said, his voice calm, low, not trying to scare her. He crouched slowly, not facing her directly. "You don't trust me. That's smart, but I'm not here to hurt you." Laura didn't understand every word, but the tone was clear. He spoke like someone talking to a frightened animal, careful, gentle, honest. She held her baby tighter and whispered something in her language. Caleb saw her lips move. He pointed to himself. "Caleb," he said, tapping his chest. She blinked slowly, her eyes narrowing, then glanced at her baby, then back to him. "Laura," she finally said. He smiled at the sound. "Laura, that's your name." She didn't answer, but didn't look away either. Caleb took that as a yes. Then the baby began to cry, soft at first, but then louder. Laura panicked. She had no milk left in her body. Her arms trembled as she rocked him, but the baby's cries grew sharper. Caleb leaned forward and reached into his bag. Here, he said, pulling out a small thermal bottle. Nutrient liquid. For kids, found it last week from a medical drop. He unscrewed the cap and offered it. Laura hissed softly, not out of hate, but out of fear. In her world, poison often came in gifts. Caleb paused, then took a sip himself. He swallowed, made a face, then said, "Tastes like metal glue, but it's safe." He held the bottle out again. This time, Laura took it. She sniffed it, checked her baby's mouth, and slowly poured a drop. The baby's eyes fluttered. He swallowed. She gave him more, and the crying stopped. Caleb smiled and sat back. "That's better," he said. Little guy just needed a refill. He sat in silence, watching the pink and red sky as the twin suns began to disappear below the horizon. Laura watched him closely, not understanding everything, but beginning to feel something odd, quiet, real quiet, not the kind that came before death, the kind that felt ... safe. Caleb pointed to the sky. "I came here for scrap, planets full of old war junk. Sometimes I find good parts to sell. That helps me eat, helps me stay moving." Laura looked up at the sky too. There was no meaning in his words for her, but his voice was soft, like a sleeping song. She rested her head against the rock behind her and slowly breathed out. "You're different," she whispered in her tongue, knowing he wouldn't understand. Caleb stood, stretched his arms, then placed a small pulse lantern nearby. It gave off a dim blue glow, enough to see but not enough to draw trouble. Laura's eyes widened. She knew that kind of light. Blue glow meant safety in her people's old stories. Her mother used to say, "When you see the blue light, it means the worst part is over." She didn't believe in stories anymore, but still, she let the tears slip from her eyes. Caleb turned quickly, hearing the soft sound. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, kneeling again. She wiped her face fast, not wanting him to see her weakness, but he had already noticed. He didn't touch her. He only placed another blanket near her side, then backed away. "I'm not here to hurt you," he repeated again. Then, he moved to the far edge of the shelter, laid his coat on the sand, and laid down, facing the stars. Laura stared at him for a long time. He had nothing now, no food left, no water. He had given everything to her and asked for nothing. She looked at her baby, who slept now for the first time in days, and deep inside her, something cracked, a wall built from fear, pain, and loss. She whispered into the night, "Why?" But this time it wasn't angry or broken. It was full of wonder. Morning came with a soft orange sky, and the sound of the wind carried less anger than before. Laura opened her eyes slowly. She wasn't dead. The heat stone beside her was still warm. Her child slept peacefully, his small chest rising with steady breath. For the first time in days, the world wasn't trying to kill them. Caleb was already awake, sitting on a rock nearby, sharpening a dull blade with a piece of scrap metal. He looked tired but calm. He didn't notice Laura watching him. She stared at his face. In the daylight, he had stubble on his chin, a scar across his jaw, and dirt covering his clothes, but his eyes were steady, focused, a survivor's eyes, not cruel, not greedy, not like the men from her world. Laura gently shifted and pulled the old translator unit from the pouch hanging around her shoulder. It was her husband's, broken in the raid. The lens was cracked, but the core flickered weakly when she tapped it. She stared at the device, then at Caleb, and finally whispered to herself, "If you can hear me." Just once she pressed the button and held it to her throat. Static. Then a beep. The unit lit up, green barely, but it connected. Caleb looked over at the sound. He stood up and stepped closer, tilting his head. Laura took a breath, held the device close and said, "Name." Laura, the translator, crackled, then repeated in a soft robotic voice, "Name, Laura." Caleb's eyebrows raised. He pointed to her and smiled. "Laura, that's you." She nodded slowly, then pointed at him. He chuckled. "Caleb." She repeated it, testing the sound. Caleb gave her a thumbs up. Then she added, "You gave food." "Why?" The translator paused, then echoed, "You gave food." "Why?" Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, then crouched down. "Because you were dying, and you had a child. I couldn't just walk past you." The translator struggled with the words. "You, dying child. No walk." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Laura looked down. "Others leave me. My people throw me away." Caleb's face grew serious. "They left you to die." "Why, widow?" she said. The translator repeated it clearly. "I am cursed." Caleb frowned. "That's stupid," the translator said. "You stupid." Laura blinked, then laughed, a small, dry laugh she didn't expect. Caleb laughed too, realizing what the machine had done. They sat in silence for a moment, both smiling slightly. Something had changed between them. A small door had opened. Caleb stood up and pointed to the horizon. "There's an old farming dome that way, maybe 5 miles. Might still work. Shelter, food, farm." The translator asked. "Old building, may be safe." "I'll carry supplies," he said. He started packing his gear. Laura stood up, legs still, shaking but steadier than yesterday. She looked at her child, then back at Caleb. "You stay?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "I'll stay with you. You're not alone." her eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Not fear, not grief, trust. She picked up her child and held him close, then slowly walked toward him and said softly, "Then we go. Together." The translator clicked and buzzed, then said, "Together." Caleb smiled, slung his bag over his shoulder, and nodded toward the sunrise. "Let's go." As they walked side by side through the soft golden sand, Caleb kept a slow pace for her. They didn't speak much, just the sound of footsteps and the quiet breathing of her child. Laura looked up at the sky and whispered her name again, not to herself, but to the world, to remind it she was still here, still alive, and she was not alone anymore. Asterisk, the stars blinked above like cold eyes watching from a distance. The air had turned sharp again, brushing against the sand with whispers that sounded almost like voices. Caleb stirred the last of the dry roots into the heat-stone pot. It didn't smell like much, but it was warm, and that was enough. Laura sat nearby with her baby in her lap, her eyes flicking toward the dark dunes. Her fingers moved gently over the child's back, but her ears twitched once, twice, then stayed raised. Caleb noticed something wrong. She didn't answer right away. Her voice was low, too quiet. The translator crackled, "Too quiet." Caleb paused. He had learned to respect that tone. When the silence grows heavy in the wild dunes, it often means something is hiding inside it. He moved quickly but calmly. "Get inside the dome," he said, pointing to the half-buried farming pod they had discovered earlier that day. It was old and covered in sand, but its steel bones still held. Laura obeyed without question, slipping inside with her child. Caleb followed and pulled a faded panel over the hole in the wall. Then he crouched beside the narrow window slit, eyes focused on the blackness outside. The wind shifted, and then he saw them dark shapes moving across the ridges. 2, maybe 3, dull green eyes, not beasts, not wild animals. Raiders. Laura touched Caleb's shoulder. "My village. Same scent," she said. The translator added, "Same scent. Danger." He nodded. He'd seen these kinds of scavengers before, those who hunted anything weak. Women, children, dying, travelers. They sold anything they caught. He reached into his bag and pulled out 3 things. A broken beacon lens, a length of shock wire, and a small pulse cell. Not much, but enough. Laura watched him work with fast, clever hands. He wasn't a soldier, but he moved like one, like someone who had been hunted before and survived. Outside, the raiders came closer. One stepped near the half-buried pod and crouched. Caleb whispered, "Time to wake them up." He tapped 2 wires together. A flash burst from the top of the dome, followed by a high-pitched shriek, just a sound trap, but loud enough to make the raiders fall back in surprise. Laura held her baby close and ducked behind an old storage crate. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only protection. One of the raiders circled the back of the dome. Caleb moved fast. He slid through a side crack and waited in the dark. When the raider passed, Caleb struck him with a piece of metal pipe, silent and direct. The body dropped into the sand without a sound. Laura saw it happen through the window. Her eyes widened. This man who had shared food, who smiled like a boy when she said her name, was now a ghost in the dark, protecting her without hesitation. The second raider climbed the sidewall, pulling a rusted hook with him. Caleb waited again, crawling through the shadows, wrapping the shock wire like a net. The moment the man dropped inside, Caleb yanked it tight. A scream ripped out, but only once. Laura stood up, holding her baby tighter. The air smelled like burnt metal and blood. Caleb returned, panting, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes sharp. "Last one's running," he said. She peeked outside. The third raider had vanished, leaving only disturbed sand behind. "Coward," she whispered. Then, louder, "You saved us." The translator repeated it, clear and even. "You saved us." Caleb didn't answer right away. He sat down, rubbing his hands on his pants, then looked at her. "You don't need to say anything," he said. I couldn't let them take you." Laura stepped closer. Her hands were still shaking. She gently reached out and placed her fingers on his arm, not to thank him, not just for comfort, but because she didn't want him to feel alone. She looked into his eyes and said, softly, "Together." He smiled. "I like that word." Dawn light filtered through the cracks in the dome's metal walls, casting long blue streaks across the floor. Laura sat by the window, rocking her child slowly while watching the human sleep. Caleb had collapsed against a wall after the night's fight, exhaustion pulling him into a deep, quiet rest. She studied his face in the soft light. Dirt smudged his skin. Dried blood clung to his arm. His hand was wrapped in torn cloth from the wound he got saving her. And yet, he didn't groan. He didn't complain. His chest just rose and fell, calmed like the desert wind before a storm. Laura's eyes narrowed. No man from her world would ever fight for a widow, especially not one from another species. And yet, here he was. Her child had life in his body, she had breath in her lungs. Because of him, she turned toward the door, opened it slightly, and stepped into the morning sun. The desert stretched far, endless and golden. There were no raiders now, only silence. When she came back inside, Caleb stirred awake. His hand reached for a weapon, but when he saw her, he relaxed. Hey, he said, voice dry. Laura knelt beside him and held out a cloth with drops of water she had gathered from the dome's cooling unit. Caleb stared at it, then slowly drank. Didn't leave, he said softly. The translator caught her answer. You didn't leave me. I won't leave you. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again and looked at her. You okay? He asked, pointing to her arm, where a bruise had started to show from the fall last night. Laura nodded. You hurt more. Caleb grinned. Maybe, but I've been hurt worse. He tried to stand but stumbled. She caught his arm. Their eyes met. You fight to protect, she said. But not just protect. The translator clicked. You protect because you care. He looked at her quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I care. Laura touched his bandaged hand gently. You're not like the others. The translator said it again, this time slower, stronger. You're not like the others. Caleb smiled faintly. Neither are you. She blinked, surprised. Me, you didn't scream. You didn't run. You stayed calm. You protected your kid. That's strengths. Laura's throat tightened. No one had ever called her strong. Not her husband. Not her tribe. Not even her mother. She had always been small, quiet, soft. But Caleb saw something else. She turned her face away quickly, not wanting him to see the heat rising in her cheeks. Caleb changed the subject. We can't stay here forever. If more of them come back, this dome won't hold. She nodded. Where? There's a human outpost west of here. Big place, safer. Maybe they'll help. She hesitated. Her people feared human cities. Loud, metal, strict. Her child might be taken. She might be separated. Caleb saw the worry in her eyes. We go together, he said. I don't leave you, not ever, the translator whispered. Together, not ever. Laura took a breath and slowly nodded. Then she moved closer, reached into her satchel, and pulled out a small item, an old woven charm, shaped like a half moon. It was a widow's mark. Her people wore it to show they were cursed. She looked at it for a long time, then slowly placed it into the fire pit beside them. The charm curled, cracked, and turned to ash dot. She met Caleb's eyes. I'm not cursed anymore. Caleb reached out and gently pressed his palm against hers. No, he said. You're free now. For the first time since her exile, she smiled, not with pain, not with fear, but with hope. Asterisk dust kicked around their feet as they approached the human outpost. The city walls were tall, rust-colored, and built with thick metal sheets that looked welded together in a hurry. Big guns pointed out from the towers. A scanner drone hovered high above, tracking their every step. Laura held her child close, wrapped in cloth against the wind. She had never seen a place so large or so full of noise. The hum of machines, the electric fences, the crackle of radios. It was a world of metal and motion. Nothing like the silent deserts she had always known. Caleb walked beside her, one hand raised to show he carried no weapons. His boots dragged slightly, his limp worse from the fight with the raiders, but he didn't slow down. When they reached the main gate, a voice barked from the speaker above. Identify yourself. Caleb stood firm. Caleb Knox. Independent. Scavenger. I'm requesting emergency entry. Got a civilian with me. She needs medical help. There was a pause, then static. Human. No, Caleb said. She's a Reskian widow and she has a child. Silence. Then the gates didn't open. Instead, a smaller speaker beside the entrance door lit up. Alien life forms without clearance are not allowed inside. No exceptions. Caleb frowned. She's not dangerous. Her child's weak. They just need rest, food, water. She's not human. Outpost law is clear. Alien refugees must go through central processing. That's 100 miles north. She won't survive the trip. Caleb shouted, neither will the kid, then leave her outside. Laura looked up at the gate, her eyes wide. She didn't understand the full exchange, but she saw enough. She saw the door that didn't open, the weapons that stayed pointed at her, the cold silence that followed. Caleb's fists clenched. You're really going to turn away a starving mother and a baby? What kind of people are you? The voice didn't answer. The speaker just went dead. Laura whispered, they say no. The translator repeated, they say no. Caleb looked at her, heart pounding in his chest. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something stronger. Shame. Not because of who she was, but because she had hoped. She had hoped someone else, besides him, might care. Caleb turned back to the gate and shouted, then I'm leaving too. He ripped off his wristband, his ID tag, and threw it at the metal wall. Laura gasped, you give up your place? Caleb nodded. I don't want a place that won't accept you. The translator said it back, and she just stared at him. Silent, stunned. For the first time, someone had chosen her, not as a burden, not out of pity. As family, she stepped forward and reached for his hand. We go where they cannot say no. He squeezed her hand and turned from the gate. Behind them, the outpost guards watched silently from above. One whispered into a radio, he's walking away, with the alien, just like that. And he was step by step back into the burning wind, back into the wild. But this time, neither of them felt lost because they weren't walking away from safety. They were walking toward something they had never truly had. Belonging. The dome stood crooked in the middle of the flatlands, half buried by sand and forgotten by time. Its frame was cracked, solar panels shattered, and the irrigation pipes long dried out. Yet inside, one light still blinked a faint green glow, buried beneath the dust. Caleb pushed open the rusted door with both hands, coughing from the dry air inside. Laura followed behind, her child wrapped tightly to her chest. The wind outside had started to howl, but the dome gave shelter. And that was enough. "This used to be a farming pod," Caleb said, his voice echoing through the empty chamber. "Hydrocrops, medical roots, maybe even energy fruit if still alive in here." Laura stepped quietly across the floor, her eyes scanning the curved walls. The place felt forgotten, but safe. She knelt beside a dusty console and pressed her fingers to the controls. To Caleb's surprise, it chirped. Lights flickered weakly. The backup core still had power. Her lips parted slightly. "It still breathes." The translator repeated her words, and Caleb smiled. "That's all we need, a little breath." They worked together without needing many words. Laura cleaned space on the floor with an old cloth. Caleb dragged metal panels together to make a wind block. He set his last power cell into the heating stone. The smell of warmth returned. Then, he reached into his bag and paused. Only one food packet remained, crushed, dented, half open his last meal. He didn't hesitate. He tore it open and handed it to Laura. She stared. "You eat." "No," he said. "I'm not the one holding a child." Laura's hands trembled as she accepted it. She broke it into small pieces, feeding her child first. The little one's lips moved slowly, weakly then faster. Laura gasped. Her child reached up, grabbing her hand. He was eating again. Caleb sat across from her, back against the wall, watching the moment unfold. He didn't speak, he just smiled. Laura held her child close, her shoulders shaking not from cold, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Relief. Why do you keep doing this?" she whispered. The translator paused, then repeated it slowly. "Why do you keep doing this?" Caleb looked up at her and said, "Because no one else did." Laura's eyes filled with tears. She crawled toward him, wrapped in the soft folds of her robe, and sat beside him for a long moment. They just watched the flickering heat light. Then a sound broke the silence, a low hum, a signal. Laura blinked. "Rescue beacon." From the core. Caleb raised his head. "You mean someone heard us?" She nodded. "Medical drones could be on the way." He laughed softly. "Well, I guess we'll have visitors." Laura reached into her pouch again, and pulled out something she had hidden since the village, her late husband's ring. She stared at it, then quietly placed it on the floor beside her. She turned to Caleb. "My people said, when a widow lets go, she can choose a new path." He didn't move. "Today," she said, her voice shaking, "I choose you." The translator echoed the words. Caleb froze, his chest rising slowly. "I'm just a scavenger," he said. "I've got nothing left to offer." Laura leaned closer, her forehead almost touching his. "You gave your food, you gave your water, you gave your place, you gave your fight." She pressed her palm gently over his heart. "That's more than any man I've ever known." Outside, the wind howled stronger. But inside the dome, 2 lives 3 with a child had found something stronger than shelter. A beginning hours later. 2 small drones landed outside. The rescue beacons led medical scouts to the dome. Their scanners picked up a faint life. Signal 3, to be exact. Inside, they found the alien woman, her child, and a tired human man leaning against her shoulder. The drone's camera zoomed in, taking its records. Laura looked up and said, "We're a family." The translator repeated, "And this time the world recorded every word."